And now she
God.
records everything.
This is stuff you're not supposed to let the public know, Brenda, so.
Well, as you all know, I've been in my spare time, which is
Quite a bit.
Voices from the Plen Hour.
You sit there.
You work for the government, eh?
guess I deserve that.
He's employed by the government.
Which means that I want to hear what you're going to say.
I'm just going to touch on two of the lines. There are many stories and many families that have combined to create the gang that we are. I'm just going to focus on a couple of them. This is just a teaser. But we plan to do. Brenda's got some audiovisual equipment. I'll come over with my laptop at the Cousin Crash in August, and we'll do a little. We'll show some PowerPoint stuff and show some pictures and old things. And I'll just say this much about the guns.
Bang, bang.
It's bad.
Don't take your guns to down.
The
And
Dixons made them good, though.
as bad as it is for the guns, I found out about 4 or 5 months ago that I'm related to the guns through the Taylors. Because my dad's great-grandmother was Elizabeth Gunn, who was related to the same crowd as Harrison, Leland, and Cameron, and so forth. So that means that I'm
Son of a gun.
I'm a son of a gun. So for the Taylor side and the gun side, it's bad. But it's very interesting.
Do we have to leave town?
Pardon me?
Do we have to leave town?
Not anymore. Because now all the bad stuff is basically legal these days.
You have to leave your guns home, Faye.
The Dixons are no less fascinating, and the two, maybe 2.5 quick lines I'm going to talk about today are the Watling line and the Blacketts. Now, those are, you might have heard of Watlings before, but you've never heard of Blacketts. So I'll start with the Blacketts. The Blackett name comes from Durham County in England, which is northeast England, about 100 miles south of what is now the Scottish border. But over the years it changed hands back and forth between England and Scotland, and it's thought that the original Blacketts are actually descended from some Scottish nobility. The Blacketts in the 1400s and 1500s lived in this Durham area, and some of them eventually ended up in London in the 16 and 1700s. The first Blacketts to move to Canada was William Blackett, who came over and settled in PEI in about 1790. There's a few stories as to whether he was actually a soldier or what he was. The most prominent story appears to be that William Blackett was a lumber buyer for the British Navy. And he would come to Atlantic Canada basically to look for tall red pines or other pine trees for the masts of ships and other lumber. That's one of the stories, but we don't know, or I don't know right now, which one's the most true. He came in about 1790 with his wife. And his wife was Anne Martha, and her original family name was Applequest.
Applequest.
Applequest. And the quest part is actually Qvist, which is Scandinavian for twig. So she was actually of Scandinavian descent at some point. And they were from the southern part of London, just south of the Thames River, in a place called Rotherhithe, which is where a lot of the ships left England back in those times to come to the New World, whether it was Canada, India, Australia, wherever. The British colonies were serviced from this area. The Mayflower left from that area as well. We have nothing to do with the Mayflower other than the fact that the captain of the Mayflower is buried in the graveyard at the church where two of our ancestors got married back in about 1750 or so, or 1770. So William Blackett comes to PEI with his wife Anne. They have a daughter named Jenny Elizabeth Blackett. Her first husband was a guy whose last name was Taylor.
Poor girl.
They didn't have any kids. He obviously skipped town or died young or whatever. Then she married a guy by the name of Henry Yorston, Y-O-R-S-T-O-N, and had 3 kids. One of the kids was John Yorston. Hold it.
Oh,
Oh, let me check this out.
yeah.
John was one.
John Yorston. I was right.
Okay.
John Yorston was born in PEI in 1836. He married in 1860 to a lady by the name of Isabel McCrae. So we are also related to some McCraes in PEI. There's plenty of them. They're like rabbits over there. Their son was named Finley Yorston. Finley Yorston would be Hayes' grandfather.
Okay.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that
I
name.
didn't know that name.
Finley Yorston
Usually we don't look at it.
married a lady by the name of Mary Alice Elizabeth McLeod.
Oh, another name I don't know.
Another name you don't
I don't
know.
know those names.
What's that?
Yorston married McLeod?
Yorston married a McLeod.
Oh, okay.
And their daughter, Virginia, is the grandmother of Plen, John, Babe, Jean, Faye,
Neat.
so forth.
Ah.
Yeah. And she was known as Jean. But her name was actually Virginia.
Virginia.
She was born in the 1890s in Georgetown, PEI. And when she was a little girl, her dad, Finley, died suddenly in 1905.
You know how?
It was
He
pneumonia.
didn't drown, we know that,
Yeah,
right?
he didn't drown.
We thought he
Yeah.
drowned, but you found out.
They thought
was
he drowned,
yeah.
and in fact they thought he had died in Charlottetown or was lost at
Yeah.
sea or something.
That's
But
right.
not
Turns out he died in Georgetown after a 2-week history of pneumonia, according to the
2 week
newspaper.
history of pneumonia?
Pneumonia,
Yeah.
yeah.
Was
So-
he steamboat captain or something at that time? Or?
He was listed as, well, his dad was listed as a fireman on a boat, you know, keeping the fire stoked, not to put out fires. And his trade, I think, might have been along the same lines
Yeah.
in the marine trade, you know, on ships. But in any event, he died in June of 1905. His wife, Mary Alice Elizabeth McLeod, moved to New Brunswick and remarried to a guy whose last name was Mason.
And this-
Ah, so this is where Mason
Mason's
comes in.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Now his name is spelled two different ways. I've seen it spelled as Aesop, A-E-S-O-P, or Asaph, A-S-A-P-A.
Like the first one, second one.
I don't know if he had any fables. Well, he did have one fable that he
You
told
mean
Mary
Mason's
Alice Elizabeth
first name
McLeod.
was- And
Yeah.
Mason's first name was that?
Yeah. He did tell one fable. He told Mary that he wasn't already married to somebody. But that was a lie.
It's like a soap opera. It's so fascinating.
I guess he
He originally came from Tancook Island in Mahone Bay, Nova Scotia, and
And
is
he
now
really was-
buried in the old Halifax graveyard.
Ah.
And he really wasn't related to us except
Not
for
at all.
marriage.
He was temporarily married.
Marriage.
Now, once Mary figured out the truth,
Oh.
she
No.
put the boot to him.
Oh,
And he's back to Nova Scotia.
really?
She then, even though she had at least one child and maybe two with him, she changed
was like-
everybody's name back to Yorston.
Wow.
Really?
That's what threw off all the
Ah.
Where did Henderson and those were they?
trail. Henderson is her son with
With the McLeod?
with
With
no
the, no,
with
with the Mason.
with the Mason.
That's why we know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but Henderson, who went and fought in World War I found out where he's buried, by the way. I
In
think
the state, in Alberta?
he's buried in Alberta.
Yeah.
He's
Because
buried
he
in
said he went on the train,
yeah,
that wheat train or something like that.
yeah, and he's
Really
near Jasper.
interesting,
I was actually in Jasper
Oh, is that?
near his
oh.
grave and had no clue he was even there.
No.
A couple of years ago.
Soap opera.
You weren't looking for it, you were just there.
Yeah.
You weren't looking for that, were you?
So-
No, I had no idea.
Jasper, Alberta. Okay.
What was the second one? Dad used to talk about two. Was there a Henderson and
There's the Henderson and there's a Manuel.
Manuel.
Manuel's the other one.
These are first names?
These are first
Yeah,
names,
first
but
names.
Manuel had a couple of different names too. Like he was
Yeah.
known by John or some other
Yes,
name, but
that's
his
right, yeah.
real name was Manuel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Even
Must
on the
have been a bad
gravestone, I think, didn't that how you found it?
Yes, I think so. Yeah. Now they also had a daughter who married a Knox
Oh,
from
yeah,
St. John,
yeah,
Wow.
exactly.
and
Remember,
He died in the wrecked in traffic or something?
something, yeah.
yeah,
From St. John.
yeah. So he's like she'd be a half sister to you know the rest of the kids to your grandmother, basically.
Wow.
He used to go visit her.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
What was her name? Remember you were so disappointed one time. You went to
There's a
We
Harry
have a
Knox
really
that's
big
in there.
family.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
Oh,
know
it's
his
huge.
name too.
Yeah.
Anyway,
So who did she marry after that?
She did.
She did.
Once she kicked out Asaph Mason, I think that was the end. Yeah, he was kicked in the Asaph. He was done. And when she died in 19
Howard, no?
when she died in 1930, her death was listed as Yorston or Yoston actually, without the R. That's why it was even harder to find.
Oh my goodness.
Because Yorstons and Yostons are very it's really all the same family. It's like Mick and Mac, they're very difficult. So when she died in St. John, this was the most interesting part for me, because whoever, like this Knox fellow, was the affiant. He was the person who knew the most about the family when it was time to fill out her details on the death certificate. And he knew that her mother was a lady by the name of Emily, and she had come originally from New Brunswick. This Mary Alice McLeod.
Okay.
Now we're over on the McLeod side.
Yeah.
And her name was Emily Yeomans.
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 Heard that name.
Well, that was Billy Ann's father's.
No, it was Yemen.
That's
Or
Yemen,
Yemen,
but
okay,
Yeomans
right.
and
Yemen
Yemen
are-
all the same gang.
Okay.
Oh, same
Oh,
year.
yeah?
Did you say?
Emily
Yeah, Yeoman.
Yeomans, otherwise known as Yemen, but mostly Yeomans,
This is so interesting.
came to PEI when she was a teenager, and her dad was a guy by the name of Michael Yeomans. Michael Yeomans' father was Eli Yeomans, and his dad was Eli Yeomans the first. I'm going back quickly here. They all lived in Hampton.
Hampton.
Yeah. Eli's father was Benjamin Yeomans, who was a loyalist immigrant to New Brunswick in 1784. He was loaded onto a boat in New York once the British surrendered New York City. The British kept New York City all throughout the Revolution. And when the armistice was signed, the Treaty of Paris, I guess it was, all the loyalists were allowed free passage away with whatever they could carry. So in October or November of 1784, Benjamin Yeomans, his son Eli, and other kids and his wife, and whatever else they could carry, were landed in Partown, which is now part of St. John.
Yes, that's where the guns
Coming
do
from?
He actually had lived in the New York area all of his time when he was there. He owned a house.
Here we're getting to the house. Are we in New York?
We're getting to
We
that
have a
house
house
in
in
New
New
York.
York?
Let's do this.
Well, now it's a tavern.
Oh, you
Oh, yeah.
I don't think you get free drinks.
Listen.
He owned a house on what is now called Bridge Street in New York.
That's where you're going to see.
That's a nice neighborhood.
Bridge
I got lost
Street,
there on the way home.
Bridge Street used to actually end with a bridge that crossed a little canal that the Dutch had dug when they were in charge of New York in the 1600s. They had widened this little creek and made it a canal, but it was so full of gunk and garbage that they eventually filled it in. But the street was always named Bridge Street after that, and still is to this day, even though there's no bridge in sight. He owned a house on Bridge Street, which is one of the original blocks that the Dutch had laid out when they founded New York in the 1630s. He was the son, or the grandson actually, of a Christopher Yeomans, who had come from England and settled originally in Hempstead, Long Island, and eventually moved his family to Rye, New York, which is near White Plains, if you're familiar with New York at all, just north of New York City. And that's where he eventually died in the early 1700s, this original ancestor who came from England, this Christopher Yeomans. Have any of you seen the movie Lincoln?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, there's a bit of a story here. It involves a relative of ours.
We're getting real important now.
It's not Lincoln, just in case.
I'll be like, guess what, guys?
If you remember the movie Lincoln, there was a part about halfway through where Lincoln has to try to convince this congressman from Kentucky to switch his vote.
Yes.
And the congressman's name was George Yeaman. He is also a descendant of Christopher Yeaman, who came from England.
That is so
He would be a
cool.
cousin to us.
That is neat.
He wasn't
That's-
aware of it at the time.
No.
Yeah. He had no idea.
He would have changed his name for sure.
So now from that side, just from Hayes's, just like a little sliver of history from Hayes, we have new names that we never heard of before. There's
Yes.
McCrae's and Blackett's and Yorstons and Yeamanses and all kinds of
We
things.
might even relate it to Roy McCrae.
I've never even heard of the name Blackett.
I've never heard of the black it.
No, Blackett.
Then you would want to know the history of the Blacketts.
Ah, yes.
For sale for $19.95.
For,
No.
no,
Now you get
Or as Mario would say, 3 easy payments of
It
$19.95.
was a lot more than 1995. But I get on the Blackett's website. They have their own family history website, the Blackett's.org
Wow.
or whatever. And they announced about a year ago or 2 years ago that they were going to come out with a book about the history of the Blackett family. And anyone who wanted to pre-order the book would, get the book. And also would have their name listed in the book as one of the original.
That is so
I believe I'm in here.
neat.
I ended up ordering 2, one to have and one maybe to donate to the library in Charlottetown because the Blacketts ended up moving to PEI.
Wow.
And I haven't done that yet, but I plan to. So that's my copy. That's the one I'll play
If you
with.
don't sell it, you're gonna donate it.
But now that Marjorie's already cleaned you out all your fights, I guess I'm a little too late. 'Cause I'm through. Yeah. Oh, it ended up being about $30, I think, Canadian. I had to pay in pounds because it's all from England,
Yeah.
or euros, I guess.
Yeah, you can get
Yeah,
them
you
when
get
you're
it, yeah.
Yes.
But the book is interesting in that it talks about the ancient history of the Blackett family. There is a disconnection between the Blacketts of Durham and the Blacketts of London. Basically, anyone you would ask would presume that, yes, it's all the same crowd, but they don't have
the connection.
the connection.